Well, let me try to put some of this in perspective. I mean, I don't disagree with everything that's been said, but I think people get carried away with headlines in the lead up to an election. And I was thinking about my two neighbors back in Virginia. I have a neighbor on one side of me who's a very conservative Republican, and a neighbor on the other side of me who's a very progressive Democrat. And they agree on one thing, and that is if their guy loses in November, it's going to be the end of democracy, and it might be the end of the world. And I guess I'll try to be maybe a little bit more pessimistic geopolitically, but say I disagree. I don't think it's going to be the end of democracy. It may be the end of the world, but not because of who's going to win or lose in November. I think the constraints on the next president of the United States are going to be enormous in foreign policy. I can't think of a time going back maybe to the high point of the Cold War when the constraints have just been so confining. You know, you look at the world situation. In my view, we are well advanced into the world crisis of our time. We have two major wars underway, one in Europe and another in the Middle East. We may have another major war in the Far East soon. According to the Economist's very convincing reports, China is preparing round the clock to grab Taiwan. According to Reuters, Iran is at 60% purity in enrichment. So they're within, according to Reuters, within days, if not weeks, quote unquote, of nuclear breakout. So that the person who wins in November, look at the game board from their perspective. They're going to have to deal with North Korea, Iran, a war in Ukraine, possibly soon a major regional war in the Middle East. They're going to have to deal with the situation in Taiwan. And keep in mind that the last two national defense strategies in the United States, one under President Biden, one under President Trump, have both said the same thing. The United States military is not postured or configured or equipped to fight two major peers simultaneously. So the big question is, how do we deal with the potential for wars in three major regions simultaneously, given those constraints? And I think the constraints are real. And, you know, to make the point, look at Biden's foreign policy. When Biden came to office, remember at that time some of his goals. He wanted to reduce tensions with Russia and China. He wanted to reduce domestic U.S. energy production. Biden came into office with the goal of returning the consulate to Jerusalem, returning to the Iran nuclear deal. None of that has happened. Biden doubled down on Trump's China policy, in fact, increased it with export controls. Biden embraced the Abraham Accords. You mentioned what would Trump do in the Middle East? Well, we know in fair measure from the last time around. It was under the Trump administration that the Eastern Mediterranean strategy that strengthened the U.S. role in relations with Greece and in this part of the world, the 3+1 format that I worked on with Secretary Pompeo, Israel, Cyprus, Greece. So we don't know everything about what it would look like. But I would say the next president is going to operate under very significant constraints. I think a lot of the hype in the lead up to an election is inevitable. But I would keep perspective. And democracies, thank you, Greece, for democracy. We're seeing its effects across the Western world. But look, I think I have a lot of friends on the left who like to talk about democracy, but they don't like to accept the outcomes when it goes against what they preach. So I would say have confidence in the United States, but understand the constraints that we're operating under. I think the strategic constraints are real. I think we do still need Europe to do a hell of a lot more than it's been doing, even with the major step up in what Europe has and it deserves to be acknowledged since the start of the Ukraine war. But the way I would put it is this to European friends. Focus less on what Trump might do and focus more on what our enemies probably will do and what you should do to improve your defenses. I think the hour is late. I think we're experiencing I think it's a very grave international situation. And that's a kind of cold comfort. I mean, I guess I'm getting my optimism from the the force of events. But I would focus on the constraints and not just the noise of an election and the inevitable frenzy of speculation. And yeah, that's my